Okay, so let's talk about G major 3 octaves and how exactly to practice those shifts into fifth position, and also for the main thing, what are the right fingerings to use. So, G major 3 octave has a couple of important parts about it. It has two big shifts, right? It has the first shift onto the third position on your A string, and then also has the shift into fifth position on E string. And the thing about these specific shifts is that they really need to land straight. And specifically, the one in fifth position needs to land more in tune than the one on the A string. The one on the A string you have a little bit more leeway because it's higher up on the string, so you can, bravado your way out of it, even though you don't really want to do that. You always want to try to land as accurately as possible, but assumingly, the third position can be reached pretty easily, right? So now the big thing is just the fifth position. And the fifth position one it's among one of the trickier shifts because it builds a lot off of your third position. And so if your third position, even your hand posture specifically, is just a little bit wrong, it won't transfer into the fifth position. And what I mean by this is that in third position, well, first and foremost, the first position is built like this. We have our hooked first finger, and then we have all of our fingers building up to it with the meaty part of our palm right here facing us. Right? It faces the instrument, it faces inward, doesn't face outward. That's the first thing about the first position. And then third position, just an extension of that. It simply carries over, nothing else changes. Right? It goes very smoothly as long as the thumb moves in correspondence, right? But the fifth position, it's a complete extension of third position. And what I mean by this is that first and third are basically identical. Nothing changes, but fifth is more identical to third than it is to first, if that makes sense. Because they have one big similarity and also one really big difference. The similarity is that it transfers over, right? Fifth position, it doesn't exactly change much because it still has the exact same format. It has the exact same hand posture as you would in first, right? Right, same thing. But the big thing about the fifth position is that your knuckles have to be very high. Well, specifically your fingers in general have to be very high in comparison to the first position. First position here, you have your angle sort of at an angle. Your fingers sort of at an angle, sorry. Right? But going into fifth position, you really want to see that big change, right? Here, the fingers sort of slouch a little bit because of the hook, right? We have the first hook, and then we put everything off of that. And every single knuckle is sort of relaxed in comparison to the fifth position where everything has to really be nice and high. And that's the entire big thing of fifth position. It has to be nice and high in order for it to really be in tune. And so that way when you're all the way up here, the fingers are unbelievably high, so are the knuckle. And the way that we bring this is by bringing our entire elbow here inward towards us. And that's a big thing, especially because if our elbow stays in first position, our fingers start slouching, right? Now our knuckles aren't as high, but the moment that we really pull that, that elbow inwards towards us, our fingers and knuckles are nice and high, and we also have much more control over it. That's what we want, control over our fingers, finger dominance. And so going into this fifth position, you really want to make sure that your fingers are structured that way, and specifically because otherwise it can really fall apart. And so here in the third position, right, you really want to have the hand already ready, right? My fingers already nice and up and high. The meaty part of my palm is still facing me. And now here into the fifth position, my entire palm stays the same, but my fingers raised even more. and I don't know if it's very visible, but it's basically my hands, even though nice and high here, right, they basically go from something like this here, 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 into an even bigger gap, you know, nice roundness, as I like to call it. And another very important connection about fifth position is that while in third position here, this part, the inner part of your wrist, does not actually hit the violin. It shouldn't, at least. It should almost be there, right? But it doesn't exactly. And some people use it to rest. That's fine. But for this exercise, we'll assume that it's not touching, even if just barely, right? That gap. But in fifth position, that changes drastically. It's almost as if the entire palm smacks into the violin. And so from the fifth position here, or from the third position here, now it's completely touching. You know, obviously I'm putting my finger in it, but it's completely unchanged, except for now this is almost slammed into the hand. And that's very important because this also can show the violinist one specific thing, is that if your hand is like this and this part of your hand is outward facing whatever, it'll show the inconsistency of the position, right? It sounds very weird, and at parts it sounds out of tune, right? And that's with the entire hand, because this position here forces our fingers to almost bend this way, which is not what we want. We wanted to keep it really nice, straight, very connected, very strong. And so now for this entire scale here, we really want to make sure that the fifth position shift is nice and strong, and also nice and very in tune. And so almost like shifting into third position, you can use the exact same exercise. So the 1, so 1 3, and then 1 1. Right, hearing it out first, and then adding the ghost note, and we'll get into that now with fifth position. So third position again, we hear out the D, right, and then we shift to it. Obviously in G major this would be C natural, but for the exercise purpose it would be C sharp in order for you to get everything really in tune, right? Right, the half steps and the whole step land nice and tune, and then you add the ghost note with the glissando, and then you gliss until you get it right, nicely in tune. And now you want to do and apply that exact same thing to fifth position. Nothing changes. It's almost the exact same thing, except now we're just on the E string, right? You hear that C natural here. And then you glissando to it until it really lands nice and straight, right? And of course, practicing that as slow as you need to, pulling the entire hand and the thumb forward, right? The thumb and the finger are all connected, right? So 1 2 3, 1 1, slide with the thumb, move down, and it should land in tune. And of course, that's without the glissando in between, right? Almost jumping to the note, that type of motion, right? And so now further into the G major scale comes the finger pattern, and now this new fifth position. Well, the finger pattern in fifth position is the C natural with your 1, the D, so a whole step, and then an E, another whole step, and then the F sharp, which is another whole step. So every single finger should have a space, and that's more seen on the violin. Space, right? Space in between my fingers. E, another space, and then the F sharp, another space, right? And if you've noticed, that doesn't actually complete the G major scale. It's missing the last G, right? That's the entire purpose of a scale. It goes from the tonic to the tonic, or from G to G in this case. And in order to achieve that, all major scales should be accomplished with the fingering of a 4/4 or a pinky extension. And this 4/4 is very important, right? So C, D, E, F sharp, and then extend out the pinky, and then that's where the G lands. And now this can be very tricky because occasionally what I see is that the people try to move the entire hand with the pinky, but that's incorrect. It should just be the pinky follows with the knuckle, and it shouldn't be that the hand follows alongside. So it shouldn't be right. The hand shifted, and now when I come back, it's out of tune, barely. But the main point of that extension here is that it should move with this type of muscle, right? It should move with that reactionary pinky muscle. So not moving the hand, but rather moving the pinky sole and making sure that it doesn't extend out. You don't want your pinky to go, you don't want that. You don't want the pinky to go flat or anything like that. You really want to make sure that the pinky is nicely curved still. That way, you extend out the knuckle, then you land in tune, and then you come back. And then you continue. And then that's how that part should be done. It should be 4/4, not anything more, not anything less. It has to be 4/4, and that's basically for every single 3-octave major scale. Nothing changes. It's always going to be 4/4. And the reason why this is also a very important thing is because there's not exactly another fingering that you can do with this. In order for G major in this scenario to be completed with 4 and then 3 and everything back, you would need to be in 6th position. But that's just awkward because you wouldn't know where to exactly put that shift inside, right? So the pinky extension is very needed. It's required for this. And so that's going up and then coming back down. Same thing with the pinky extension. But now here's a thing with the fingerings in G major. There are 2 specific fingerings that you can use. And the one that I would suggest is the one that after we land back on the C is not to go back to 3rd position. And then I think that's harder than this other fingering that I was taught. It's from the C all the way down to 1st position, and then you end the scale in the 1st position, right? That way it eliminates that A string crossing, which can land a little bit out of tune, like I did with F sharp, right? So it's a little bit more dangerous with that. But if you just go from the 1, 4, it lands more smoother, lands cleaner on the string. And another thing with this is, well, how would you practice it, right? And now the big thing about this shift is that it's a very large shift. It really is. It's a grand total of 4 positions in between. 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And then obviously the 5th. But the best way to do it is thinking about the way that Augustin Heidelich, a professional soloist, thinks about it. And this is also very intuitive. Is that when going back specifically, of course you want to think about it as the hand goes back, not the violin, so you don't pull the violin, right? That'd be concerning. But instead you want to think about it as the hand goes back, but the thumb leads. And so what that means that, okay, if you're 5th position here, well, obviously your thumb is about here, right? Hitting about this bezel. But when you go back just slightly, it should just be slight. The thumb leads, and then the 1st finger lands. And so visualize, it'll be, with the thumb up here, just to visualize. Further so. And then it lands. So that way your 1st finger tracks with the thumb, right? So and now it's very quick, right? It'll be very slight, but it'll be very noticeable as well. Right? And that's exactly what we want to build, right? So it would be 1, 1, and then the 4 on the B, right? Right? Just the C was a little bit out of tune on the other ones, but pinky stretch. Now from here into first position, and then 4. And so now there, I didn't play the first finger, right? But of course you can do that while you begin. That's what we call a ghost note. And a ghost note is just a note in between a shift that, you know, you may play it to begin with, but eventually it will be eliminated. But it also act as our step. And a step in the sense that, you know, it leads us to the next tone, right? So from the C, the F is now, or the F sharp, sorry, is now our leading tone. And it's also a ghost note. It's not a leading tone, sorry, but, well, I mean it is, but it's a ghost note. And so we won't play it, but in order to make sure that that shift is right, you want to make sure that the F sharp is right. So if the F sharp lands, and the B will also land, right? But let's say that the F doesn't land. Let's say that you drag the F a little bit too far back. You can hear how that sounds basically F natural, right? So really making sure that that one lands in tune before anything. And for example, eventually you would want to get rid of that ghost note, right? So really making it a ghost note, right? So, right? Eventually eliminating it completely. Just imagining it's there. And then eventually with quickness, right? And then you continue to scale. And so that's the first fingering. That's the 1-4. That's the that you can do. And then there's also the other one, which is you're going to from 5th to 3rd to 1st, which is it's an interesting fingering. It is, because it has that intermediate shift that would almost act like a ghost shift, you know, with the ghost note being the A, and then you play the A, and then you do the ghost note again to the F sharp. You play the G though, and then you continue downwards. It works, but I wouldn't recommend it, because it also has guaranteed to be more out of tune. If your first finger cannot land out of tune, because again, that's 2, you know, ghost notes that you have to do on one string, I would recommend just doing the first one. And then there's the other one. Well, that's going into first position on the complete last note. But now the one that goes, you land on the A, but you stay in the 3rd position. And then into first position on the A string instead of the E string. That one can work, but again, if you're not very confident on your A string 3rd position, I wouldn't recommend it, especially because of that F sharp, right? It needs to sound like that going down. And that can be very complicated sometimes, because especially if you want to take it up at higher speeds, it can drag. It really can. But as of that, you know, those are the big shifts of specifically the 5th position shift and the pinky extension. And then now the last thing is just the simple 3rd position part, you know, going to 3rd position on the A string. And now for this, it's mainly knowing your finger steps, knowing how in the 3rd position this would be your D, your E, your F sharp, and then your G. So it's a whole step in between the D and the E, whole step between the E and the F sharp, and then a half step with the F sharp and the G. That's all you gotta know. And that can be built D. There's a space in between here for the whole step. The F sharp has another space, and then the G sharp is basically right next to it. And then that's that 3rd position. 2 spaces here, and then that's obviously seen very close together. And that concludes the entire G major scale. And so now for all of the fingerings. That's G major for sound quality as well. And then that's the entire scale.